From Sam now saying, okay, ready to go. So I'd like to welcome everybody to the Working Safely During the Coronavirus Outbreak webinar. As I said, that's a tongue twister and don't think it'll catch on as a hit single. I'm Richard Cook and I'm the Business Development Manager for SEMLEP. SEMLEP is the the public-private body whose role is to help economic growth across the South East Midlands in terms of supporting businesses, especially in the current crisis, but supporting skills and career development in the region and creating great places to live and work. Clearly today we're focusing on the business agenda and the hot topic of working safely in the light of the COVID pandemic. We have a good broad panel today of presenters. We've got Alan Turner, who runs the 3-8 consultancy, which is specializing in HSE, who will kick off and look at COVID and the issues surrounding the return to work. We've got James Butcher, who's Head of Policy and Research at the National Federation of Builders, and he'll present on construction issues, site procedures, evaluating and managing risk, and PPE. We've got Gayle Dawson, who's the Senior EHS manager at Collins Environmental, who has experience of operating throughout the pandemic, and we'll be focusing more on the human and behavioural aspects. Kevin O'Brien, he's the Director of Compliance at CBUT, a national distributor and logistics operator, and he's going to be talking from the warehouse and logistics perspective. And finally, we've got Richard Johnson, the EHO at Central Beds, who will talk about the HSE approach on the return to work and working safely. And if we do have a time, we may have a quick panel discussion at the end. During this webinar, I'd just like to emphasize two things. We'd appreciate if you keep your mic on mute while the presentations are going on. And we'd welcome your questions. So if you could please type them in to the chat session, that would be great. And we'll try and ask or summarize if there were several issues and questions on the same topic. So thanks, and I would like to hand over to Alan Turner.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I've put together a couple of slides that I'd like to go through, but first of all, my background, I've nearly done, sadly, nearly 50 years in environmental health in total, public health and environmental health, with a variety of backgrounds I'm coming from. We dealt with Birmingham International Airport in the past, the NEC, done lots on infectious diseases as well. But I would like to just try and set into context where we're coming from with COVID, a little bit about COVID, and hopefully that will help set the scene as we move forward in dealing with the various aspects of risk assessments as well, and the challenges that you're going to be faced. And hopefully at the end of it, you will come out of it with rather more of a can-do attitude rather than a can't-do. And I think that's where we need to be with this. But if I just pull up my first screen, please, which is, hopefully we can find this. Can everybody see that or not? Just trying to pull one up.
Not at the moment, Alan.
Okay. Let's have a look. I thought this would have been on yours, but if not, can you pull it up, Sam?
There we go. It should be coming in a minute. Yeah, we can see your Zoom screen.
Okay. That would be good. There?
No. Do you want me to do it if you want to continue speaking?
Yes, please.
Okay, if you stop your screen share.
Okay. There.
You carry on, Alan, and I'll bring it up.
Okay. All right. So really what I wanted to say is, first of all, what's in the name? So the disease the coronavirus disease, which is called COVID-19, as you know, that is actually the disease named the virus, which is where I wanted it to come from. And this is the interesting part, is the full name is severe acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus. And so you've got SARS-CoV-2. Now, the reason I wanted to bring this up is that there's been some, not necessarily misinformation on this, but you've been in a position where they started, although this is a SARS virus, and they wanted to change the name. So it is a SARS related virus, but it is different. The World Health Organization dropped the SARS terminology, ironically, because of an unnecessary fear for some populations, especially in Asia, which was first affected by SARS outbreak in 2003. It's an irony, of course, that this has exploded beyond that to where it is now across the world. But it is related. And there's another one which I've put here, which was MERS in 2012. That was the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. Now, the thing about that one is, and we've got very excited about what we've been doing now, the fatality rate for that was 38%. And so we need to get into balance of what we are doing with the SARS, our COVID outbreak now, and to some of the others that's happened in the past. And a bit about viruses, which I think is important. The actual viruses are quite weak. And we talk about viruses as a living entity, in which they actually aren't a living entity, and they cannot multiply on their own. And that helps us in combating infections. They actually must live. They have to infect the cells of a living creature in order to reproduce. So, for example, outside the body, they are challenged. I know they can do some, ferocious when they get in the body, but the temperature, sunlight, all helps to weaken the virus. And you may have heard people discussing about the virus can live on the doorknob for 4 days or on other surfaces. What in reality it means is that although it may be on the doorknob, and then if a swab is taken, and then in a laboratory situation, they can isolate that virus, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's infectious for 4 days. And I think that's important to realize. The guidance that we've got on 72 hours is all based on what has happened in the laboratories in a lot of instances, and taking it to the worst case scenario. And some of this may help. So a virus lifespan, for example. On most non-porous surfaces, metal and plastic, such as aluminium or keyboards, it's normally there for about 9 hours. On a absorbent material, such as fabric, soft toys, wooden surfaces, 4 hours. But the most fantastic thing is that on our own skin, most viruses will only live for about 20 minutes. And that's important, because coming back to one of the government's main guidelines, and it will always be there for any virus, is good personal hygiene. And one of the, cannot strongly recommend it enough, hand washing. Good hygiene, good hand washing is still one of the best practices to combat this, together with social distancing. And this is where it leads on to the risk assessments. If you look at the government guidance, which is stay at home, work from home if you can, limit people, limit contact with other people, keep your distance if you go out, the 2 meters apart regime, wash your hands, and do not leave your home if anyone in your household has it. If you compare that to the normal process of risk assessments, then that is a very similar hierarchy. And that's where, going forward, you still need to be looking at those criteria in building any phased return to work and bringing people back to work. It's important that you still look at what and where people can work from home and minimise contact with other people. I accept with what we're looking at today, that's not possible in all situations, but it's still there and one to be considered. Working safely guidance, as I've said, this is where it's the sort of hierarchy come from. But I'm sure with James and the other colleagues on this conversation, any risk assessments that you do, it's imperative that they are real time, valid, shared, agreed, and reviewed. And it's important that what you put in place is flexible, it's fluid, and that you can adapt and adopt to any changes that come forward. Guidance for those returning to work, key changes and reminders of existing health and safety risks. When you look at bringing people back to work, things will have changed. And also as you increase numbers, risks increase. So the existing working practice on limited numbers might suffice. As you increase those numbers further, then those risks will change. And similarly, in all this, all the risk assessments come back to one thing. They're all a variation on a theme, but it's either to stop the contraction of the disease or the transmission of the disease. And my own comment in all this, finally, is to keep it real. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. I think that was really useful and a good context, and to actually say that we're in a scenario where this is a virus which has been around for a while, or similar viruses have been around for a while, is very useful. I think in terms of it, it's given us a broad top line and framework to work within. I'm going to move on to James Butcher, Head of Policy and Research at the National Federation of Builders, to build on this, to use the pun, and talk about construction issues and site procedures and managing risk. So over to you, James.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Alan. Alan, if you wouldn't mind not sharing your screen so I can share mine, that would be super. Thank you very much. Right, chaps. Go. Hopefully everyone can see that full screen. Thank you very much for having me, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is James Butcher, and I'm the Head of Policy at the National Federation of Builders. And I'm briefly going to talk to you about some of the considerations that you need to take into account when returning to site. Now, this webinar is probably, and indeed some of the webinars that we've been putting on, is probably slightly behind the curve, because the construction industry technically never shut down. The government came out very early in the COVID process and said, as long as you can operate in line with Public Health England guidance, you can continue. So as long as it's safe to do so, and as long as you could adhere to social distancing, it's safe to do so. Now, because of other factors in the economy, whether it's supply chains, whether it's people actually becoming ill, not being able to get on site, whether it's materials, what have you, a number of sites did close down, did stop operating for a period of time. And what we found as a membership body is that the majority of our members are now back on site. But hopefully, if you haven't returned to site, I have some useful information for you, or if you are returning to site, or if you're on site, there'll still be some useful information in this presentation, building on some of the important points that Alan has raised. So firstly, if you are in the construction industry, the go-to document for you is probably the site operating procedures that have been published by the Construction Leadership Council. That is a task force of 12 organisations that broadly represent the construction industry, and they have come together to develop some guidance for how sites can continue to operate in the COVID crisis. Now, obviously, with the COVID crisis, we've got the Coronavirus Act and the regulations that come from that, but those regulations are nowhere near as extensive enough as to be very prescriptive as to how a site should look. So the industry, working with the government and working with Public Health England to start off with, has come up with these site operating procedures. And this is a starting point document for you to use. If you're on site, you're probably already aware of this. And if you are a member of a trade association, you've either probably been directed to it or your trade association has its own version. So the SOP is kind of a framework document, and then most trade associations, so us at the NFB, have produced a bespoke version for our members, which slightly tweaks some of the suggestions for the membership that they represent. The important thing is that these aren't rules, this is guidance and advice. However, it does have the backing of government. So Alok Sharma, our Secretary of State, who unfortunately appears to have come down with coronavirus himself in the last few days, wrote to our industry formally and said that continue working so long as you're adhering to the site operating procedures which are based on Public Health England advice. So it's Swado got the nod from government, and if you refer to the government advice on working on a construction site, it will again refer to these site operating procedures. The important thing to note is that they change. So we are now on version 4 of the Construction Leadership Council's site operating procedures, and they will continue to change and evolve as we move through different stages in the crisis. So for example, the difference between version 3 and version 4, a major difference was the removal of the 15-minute working rule, for example. And we expect that there will be changes as we progress through the crisis, which means that if you're a construction company and you read the site operating procedures and you set your site up 2 weeks ago based on these, or even longer ago, you need to keep making sure that you're refreshing that information and keep referring back to those site operating procedures so that you're up to date. As I've suggested, that there you can find them on the Construction Leadership Council's website, and they're directed to from the government's website as well. But if you are a member of a trade association, I would strongly advise you to give their advice lines or your membership services officer or what have you a call, because they will be able to provide some additional information and make sure that you're kept up to date. The overarching, I will actually just go back to those. So on the site operating procedures, this covers a range of things. So how your workers are going to travel to site, how you're going to stagger the working times of workers, maybe the setup of your welfare facilities, deliveries to site, for example, how you will organise rotas and shifts, how you will make sure that you have an effective cleaning routine, how you'll manage canteens, toilet facilities, as well as dealing with some of the specific risks and where you can and can't realistically work. Now, all sites, however, should be undertaking individual risk assessments, and indeed the government's advice suggests that everybody should be undertaking a COVID-19 risk assessment. And as Alan said, this should be a living your risk assessment should live and change and evolve. You need to identify what the risk is, you need to quantify how much of a risk that is, and then you need to take action to reduce that risk. And then most importantly, you need to ensure compliance. So you need to continually monitor to make sure that your guidance or the actions you're taking to mitigate your risk are enough just to say, here's our risk assessment, this is the results of it, and then leave it there. And a key part of this is going to be communication, because you're going to need some really significant behavioural and cultural change on site to what we have previously as an industry been used to. So the more communication and the more, you have a duty to consult with your employees. You need that feedback to know whether it's working, how it could work better, how it makes your site, how it affects your site's productivity, if there's any ideas for how that can be improved, if employees are feeling that they're at a higher risk than they ought to be. That needs to be a continually evolving process. So whether you're doing that at site meeting, whether you're letting people know before they even arrive on site, making sure that people's line managers are aware and are continually discussing this. And the important part of a risk assessment is that we all, I think, recognise that the 2-metre distance rule on site is going to be really, really difficult to achieve in some circumstances, and undertaking some activities. So here you are allowed to mitigate the risk where the 2-metre rule can't be applied in full all of the time. And this, of course, is what we refer to as the hierarchy of controls. So here you need to take action to mitigate whereby workers are working within that 2-metre rule. That could be, for example, erecting screens. It could be, for example, making sure that you have small teams that only work together, cohorting. It could be that when people are arriving on site, and they're perhaps arriving together, that the people who arrive together on site, if they are doing so and it's not possible to maintain that 2-metre rule, that they do so and then they work in those teams so that you are reducing the risk. You might have zonal working, for example. There are a whole range of activities, and of course the most obvious one is going to be the cleaning regime. Whether it's making sure that you have back-to-back working or side-by-side working rather than face-to-face working, you will need to mitigate the risk of workers working within 2 metres. And you will need to evidence the action that you're going to take and what you're doing to reduce the risk that you have identified from workers working within 2 metres. And you will inevitably come up with conflicting considerations. So with the COVID-19 guidance and the importance of reducing the risk of transmission of COVID-19 and the other responsibilities that you have, the important thing, my number one message to you is that do not do an activity that is unsafe because you are trying to adhere to COVID-19 guidance. If you can't realistically mitigate the risk of COVID-19 transmission and then you can't safely do a task, you really need to ask yourself whether you're actually going to be doing that task or not. And the answer should be no. While the HSE has said that it will take a pragmatic approach to the enforcement of COVID-19 guidance, that doesn't mean that you can make workers unsafe, not in any way, stretch or form. An example, and the health and safety professionals that come after me might correct me on this, might be that under the CDM regulations you have to provide welfare facilities, such as a kettle, for example. Now you might decide that a kettle, because of the number of people that touch it, and transmission is obviously higher on skin-to-skin contact, as Alan mentioned, you might decide that that kettle needs to, in order to mitigate the risk, needs to be cleaned between each use. Now, maybe for whatever reason you can't clean it between each use, so you might temporarily take that kettle away. Actually, that's in breach of the CDM regulations. But what we're doing here is we're recognising that it's a national crisis, and you're taking action to mitigate the risk of COVID-19 transmission, because obviously those CDM regs were not written with COVID-19 in mind. But what you must not do is compromise the safety of your workers. Then I want to touch on, and this is really my final slide before I move on, is face coverings and PPE. In the construction sector, we have PPE, we always have, whether it's gloves, whether it's visors, high visibility clothing, safety footwear. That's what we recognise as PPE. That PPE is different from PPE that protects against COVID-19, and those things should not be confused. The government has also stressed that medical grade PPE should not be used to mitigate risk on sites. So what that means is the actions you take need to mitigate the risk of working, in an environment where COVID-19 transmission might occur, and the answer is not just a simple opt-out, put a surgical mask on. That is not the answer. The PPE that you use to keep your workers safe from the activities they're undertaking on site, they need to continue to do that and use that PPE. And surgical grade PPE is not an effective, certainly not an effective substitute for what we would traditionally consider PPE on site, but it's also not an effective substitute for reducing COVID-19 transmission. You need to take other mitigating actions. However, the government has said that you can support employees wearing face coverings, and the important message here is you need to give your employees advice about these face coverings. Richard is going to speak a bit later, but he was telling me yesterday that where employees are consistently wearing face coverings without advice, they're constantly touching them and moving them around. So actually you're increasing the risk of transmission. So it's up to the employee whether they wear a face covering, but you need to give them clear advice. Where the government has, however, given advice is that face coverings may be beneficial on public transport. Importantly, those face coverings don't protect the wearer, they protect other people. So the mental kind of reassurance of wearing a face covering is actually a fallacy. It doesn't protect the wearer, so you need to give some really clear advice on how often those should be cleaned, how people should clean their hands after touching it every time, how it needs to be managed in that regard. I will finish by giving you some useful documents. So here you have our policy briefing on the site operating procedures of the NFB. So if you're an NFB member, you can access this in the members area. Here you've got the CLC guidance. You've got the government advice, so COVID secure workplaces, the HSE's short guide, and also the British standard guidance as well. Now, if you're on site, then I would absolutely recommend that you use as a starting point the site operating procedures, and then it's worth reading the government guidance. The government guidance is actually all included in the site operating procedure, and the approach that the HSE takes in this document is more generic. It's not specific to the construction sector, but it is worth a read. And I will leave it there, and I think Richard will come back to introduce Gayle. Thank you very much.
Lovely.
Everybody.
Thank you very much, James. There weren't any questions actually posed to you, so I'd like to just ask one, which is, how are these policies working in practice, and are there any areas that you would urge the industry to focus on?
That's a good question. So in practice, they are working, but site productivity is reducing quite substantially. And most people are using the mitigating, the hierarchy of controls to provide mitigation, because actually the 2-meter rule on sites is proving, I think, very, very difficult from what we've heard. So using that hierarchy of controls to manage that risk is certainly a heads up I would give to everybody, because it is actually, anyone who works on a construction site will tell you it's very, very impractical to work at 2-meter distancing. And also I think the key thing there is the cohorting, because if you've got a big site, you've got a lot of people on there, and you need to really manage that properly. But unfortunately, productivity will almost definitely fall on your site, but that's unfortunately a trade-off you need to take to keep the workforce safe.
Okay, thanks, James. That's very good to make quite a legalistic issue very understandable and very practical. So I really do appreciate that. And I've taken away like the hierarchy of safety, COVID and CDM. There's something I've learned today. So thank you very much. And I'd like to hand over to Gayle, Senior EHS Manager for Collins, to talk about the environmental issues and human and behavioural. So over to you, Gayle, thank you.
Okay, I'm just going to share my screen, and hopefully, you don't want to see that, hopefully you should see the slideshow. Okay. Oh, I'm ahead of the game. I apologise, hold on. Can you just tell me which screen you're looking at? Is it the front screen of COVID-19 arrangements?
It is, Gayle, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so good afternoon. My name is Gayle Dawson. I'm the EHS manager at Collins Aerospace. Collins Aerospace is a large US multinational. We supply plane parts around the globe. And part of that is that we've had to support through the pandemic to make sure that there are planes available to transport parts and people to where they need to be. So that's meant that this site has had about 25% of its employees working throughout. And that's been a challenge that we've kind of met, and hopefully I can share some of our experiences over the next few minutes. It says, hopefully, that's fun. There we go. So our business is people dependent. So to make sure that employees are safe and confident that the workplace is safe, has been really a challenge for us. And we needed to create a secure environment that they're willing to come to work on. And that's really important. We've taken the government guidance and we've created a gap analysis to make sure we met all of the requirements. But we've really looked at the key things that are important to us, from cleaning to social distancing, how to raise concerns, and then learning best practices from other people. You know, what's the best thing in our business, what's the best thing in manufacturing to make sure that we can continue. And one of the things that we've really learned is communication to all in different media, in different ways, really helps. It gives confidence. It gives people opportunity to raise their concerns. It gives them a focus really to be able to say what's concerning them, and then we can rectify things. And they also bring good ideas that we've been able to implement and change our business with. We need to be flexible, and that's something we've really learned. Some of our standard practices just don't work in the current environment, and things that we've held on tight to for a very long time have gone by the wayside. Not compliance things, but things that are business related, and actually then it has brought a breath of fresh air to some of our processes, to have to rethink how we operate. I'm technically challenged today, so I apologise. What we've looked at is trying to think practically: how do people operate on the site? What do they do? How do they enter, exit? How do we set up our general processes? It's not natural, and that's something we've really learned, is it's not natural for people to be 2 meters apart. It's not natural for them not to congregate around the coffee machine and meet in different areas. It's not natural for us not to have face-to-face meetings. We've had to come up with different solutions to that. And it kind of started from before you come to work. So questioning, how do I feel today? Do I have any symptoms? Do I need to question that? Do I need to see if I need to ring 111 and check, and giving people information about that and the process that they should do, and asking them to just question. One of the things that we've given as a gift, as a response to people, is some thermometers. Individuals couldn't get hold of them. We could use our buying power to go out and get thermometers, personal thermometers for all. It was a nice gift, but it also helps us to make sure people can check if they have a fever. We've really been aware of the high touch points across the site. So making consideration on the coffee machines and door handles, photocopiers. How do people interact with those, their tools and their equipment on site? How do you make it individual to the person? Do we need to buy extra equipment, or do we need to put in place cleaning materials and make it an individual's responsibility? And that's been one of the important things, to make it a shared culture, so that individuals have a responsibility for the workplace, their workplace, and those around them, and that managers must make that happen. So we've introduced cleaning stations that are available in across the site. They're really clear, so everybody knows where they'll find equipment, hand sanitizer. We've introduced additional day cleaners to clean the high touch points. So again, it's about confidence that the door handles are regularly being cleaned, that the things that people touch in kitchens and kettles are cleaned throughout, and there's a process to do that. And we've made it individuals' responsibility to look after their areas. So that's their desk, that's their keyboard, that's their mouse. you look after it. You may take it home, or you may, transfer with it, but that belongs to you. So again, it's ownership of the work environment. And again, that's about confidence. We've had to put in place things like taking meeting rooms out of use, and looking at the circulation space around the building. That's caused a few interesting opportunities. We don't always get it right. To get to the coffee machine from my office was 2 flights of stairs and a 5-minute walk. We had to rectify that, but it does make you have to think as to how do people circulate around the site? What are they carrying? Do they need to be closer to certain areas to reduce the cross-contamination? We have 4 buildings on this site. One of the first things we introduced was you stay in your building and there's only key people that will move between. So again, that's about reducing the risk to the employee and the exposure that they have. We have had to redesign quite a lot of our areas, either move lines away or change lines. One of the key places we changed was reception. It's kind of an obvious place, but we've introduced screens, we've put in lines on the floor, we've put in places people stand and wait, places where post is put so that it's not just handed to somebody, and just thinking of the process. We've done that across the site, looking at the individual processes, whether or not that's with the employees and managers or involving EH&S team, but looking at what that changes should be and where people come in contact with each other. What's it really important to keep together, and what do we really just not need in our processes? And that's become kind of working around the site. So common areas are kind of our pinch points. We can only have on site enough people that will meet our canteen requirements and our washrooms. We're looking ahead when we bring people back, and we're looking at having portable toilets on site, because we've seen, and we've already social distance in men's urinals, they're already taped off. So what do we do? How do we think ahead now about practical measures that we need? Good example is the smoking shelter. One of our tight rules is you will smoke in the smoking shelter. When we walk around the site, it's obvious to everybody else. If you're smoking, you can smoke a bit further out, but you have to sometimes be really obvious with instructions. So yes, you can smoke further out as long as to make sure you're social distancing. That's one of the rules. It's just that relaxation of some of our requirements. Things that we really must and had to put in place was making sure we had emergency response, and that had to change. So we have to make sure we have enough first aiders. We can't just assume now that we've got 40 first aiders on site. We've got to check, because we've got furloughed staff or people working from home. So what does that mean to us? And again, for fire risk assessment and fire wardens, we've had to change that and put in place and then re-communicate what that means on the site. Line managers are key to this, and making sure that they are communicating with their employees. They are really having quite frank discussions. We've had quite a lot of people with stress, and stress for the environment that not the work environment, but the general world environment that we're now facing. And so that's taken a lot of time. Our mental health first aiders have been on hand and been very active at supporting people. And we've communicated lots of information, from relaxation techniques to, where do you get help and advice from? Not just for the employee, but for their family too. Homework and schoolwork has caused more than one employee to have a crisis. And that's something, as a manager, you have to bear in mind, that people are going through a lot, and you need to be able to support that. And one of the things that we've really pushed, and we've had lots of communication, we've got communication boards and information, but making sure that people are aware of how to raise concerns, whether or not that be through their line manager, through EH&S, our ethics officers, HR, and at the top, our managing director, who's been very clear that if there's something that you're unhappy with, you raise it with him and he will fix it. And he's got an open door policy to make sure that it is how important it is that people feel secure on site and while they're working. So it's been an interesting few months. I've learned a lot, continuing a lot of our safety programs that need to be in place. That's had to go alongside making sure we're safe.
Thank you very much, Gayle. That's been really useful, and I've certainly taken a couple of things away. Not natural is one of them, and the emphasis that we are all humans and they do have a life outside, which I think is important. But also being positive, refresh, and look at the risks broadly. So I think that's been very useful. I'm going to move on now to Kevin. Kevin from CBUT, and it'd be useful if you can close your screen down, Gayle, and we can get Kevin's up. So thanks again, Gayle. Cheers.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully everybody can hear me. My name's Kevin O'Brien. I've worked for 33 years now in the logistics industry. 12 years of that have been with CBUT, and hopefully I'll get another 12 years in before I retire. You never know. However, despite not only my experience, but the panelists, all the attendees' experiences, which we've no doubt got, fundamentally, all of us have only had 6 months' experience in how to deal with coronavirus. So in 2019, it was key to know, not only to understand your own people, whether directly or vicariously through other managers or supervisors, you understood their characters and their behaviours. But for the past few months, we need to know not only our own people, but we also have to have knowledge of our people's people too. So it's become essential to know their families, who people live with, who they've got under the same roof, including where they go on holiday, what care family members receive, and where the younger household members attend school. So to be honest, the early days of coronavirus back in December, personally, I would say we're met with some cynicism, not only within our business, but I'm sure within some of yours. But in our case, our managing director was quite forceful about it in the early days. You may remember back in December, we were all contained with the excitement of a general election and getting Brexit done, all in the same sentence, and then coronavirus crept in. Despite early warnings, so it warranted swift actions to minimise operational impact for our businesses. So at CBUT, where I work, what did we do? Basically, we started by risk assessing our people with their full support. We maintained a simple spreadsheet to inform the business on any employees that we needed to give priority to, particularly for health and welfare purposes. In addition, monitoring government advice was essential, and it became my task to enjoy the press conferences and inform the business on any next steps that we were about to take. So for anyone directly involved with health and safety, as a number of us are here this afternoon, it became essential to review risk assessments and update them to include pandemic measures. Alongside these pandemic policies, we had to look at mental health policies, including post-traumatic stress disorder, which we modernised. In the first week of March, all of our staff were spoken to individually and personally were written to with a That's half of the letter that you can see on the screen in front of you now, and what was expected from them in addition to our own personal hygiene routines. Sections of the letter mirrored what became our COVID-19 policy, and this was addressed through training, briefings and toolbox talks. Additionally, specific letters were also sent to employees who we were aware had issues with asthma, diabetes or care concerns, particularly an indirect impact of those who had school children. So when government announced the furlough scheme, our operations board adopted the stance that, like government, our priority was to secure jobs. We supported those with known health issues as a priority, which included retiring one of our drivers who had COPD 3 months early, and that was done with his agreement. And we've currently got 2 more drivers who've been furloughed throughout this period, both of them with family member concerns. Meanwhile, on the sites, despite some initial supply problems, we gained stocks of wipes and antibacterial sanitisers, which were provided throughout our warehouse offices and to all of our LGV drivers. One of our customer sites has a face covering policy, which we do adhere to, of course. As general knowledge of the virus grew, we reacted upon the guidance and regulations, taking a financial hit to the business by having to reject containers where 3 or 4 unloaders were required, as we could not guarantee the 2 metre safe distance could be maintained fairly. Since then, we have invested in a 6 metre conveyor to aid unloading some containers. This was via a risk assessment outcome in liaison with the people actually doing the jobs. Site rules were altered for all visitors so that visiting drivers remain in their cab during unloading, yet on request remain with the availability of use of toilets, an issue where to date on 6 occasions our drivers have been refused use of these facilities elsewhere, which is of course a breach of the workplace health, safety and welfare regulations. Despite providing all drivers with copies of letters from the Road Haulage Association, which only now results in forwarding intelligence also to the HSE. Signage, regular updates and ensuring open two-way communication is maintained are essential ingredients to supporting each other in our business. As you can see, I'm in the fortunate position of being able to work from O'Brien Towers. Again, business investment had to be made in new laptops, lights and in some cases furniture for those able to work from home, including myself, as I said, and it now seems to be the way that our business is more likely to continue in future. Personally, while working at home, I've taken the opportunity to undertake a COVID-19 pandemics modelling and policy course so that I understand what government and SAGE recommend on a daily basis. Close links, as ever, have been maintained with members of SEMLEP, the Northants Logistics Forum, particularly Charlotte Patrick and Jenna Parton from Public Health Northants, who have provided welcome information and support throughout. So throughout the period of this pandemic, our operations board has met via Zoom at least twice a week, and from day one the word trust was used. Although of course there always remains question marks about certain individual characters in logistics, our trust in them has been repaid. At the end of the day, our drivers, for example, we give them a £100,000 vehicle and no doubt thousands of pounds worth of stock behind them if we're lucky, so that trust is an immense thing. We've managed furlough rotation in a balanced, fair way without question. We have had minimal absence and minimal issues despite the additional personal stresses that everybody must be carrying. It's a credit to our people and indeed the industry at all levels that despite some financial losses, as everyone else has also undoubtedly suffered, we're coming through this without a single job loss and have managed to keep our customers happy. In fact, we've actually gained 2 new contracts in the period. In short, our trust in our people and customers has been returned to us as a management team. However, there is always another process to deliver, and looking at government's message from yesterday, now it's surrounding people that return from holidays abroad if they are fortunate enough to ever go abroad again. However, just to close, there is also one process that we have in place which we haven't used, which is what to do in the event of a positive COVID-19 test. and hopefully we will not have the need to use it. Thank you.
Kevin, thank you very much. I think that was fascinating and interesting to sort of put in that idea that you've had to change things, but actually changed it for the good, and you may maintain that going forward. And I think that trust element, you know, if you've built it over a long time, there's quite a lot of value, and trust is a relationship both ways, isn't it, as well? So I think that's a good point that I've actually taken away from it. And the fact that actually you can actually win new contracts during it. I actually think there's a lot of change happening in business, and the winners are winning a bit more, and potentially other people will lose. So I think those have been some good points I've taken away from that. I'm going to I'm going to say thank you, Kevin, and ask Richard to touch on the HSE. We've got one question at the moment, but I'm going to hold that until the end. Okay, thanks now, and over to Richard.
Good afternoon. Is it okay if this keep my screen off, if you don't mind, or on or off? I don't mind. If I just
that's fine, Richard.
Okay,
whatever
fine.
you're comfortable with.
Yeah. So my background is I've worked in local authority for the last 24 years as a health and safety inspector. I've worked closely with health and safety executive on many occasions, and lots of our work and our approaches and the legislation does overlap. So in general terms, the advice I'd just like to give out there in terms of the enforcement approaches and what's really important for businesses, irrelevant of the type of business, is it's just really, really important that in relation to COVID, they just do the risk assessment always in the first place. And in fact, many years ago, there was some approved code of practice, which were then withdrawn. And on the HSE website, they have risk assessment templates. And it might be worth for businesses to look at their template, compare and contrast it against the HSE template. You'll notice in most businesses that I've seen anyway, the biggest difference is the health and safety executive have removed the risk evaluation from the assessments, either high, medium or low. I've seen hundreds, if not thousands, of risk assessments where people put numbering systems in, color coding in. A lot of the time it does work, but even more of the time it doesn't work, and it results in some confusion. So have a look at the HSE risk assessments in relation to your COVID assessment, and try and simplify any assessment as much as possible in line with the HSE template example. And secondly, I know this from first direct hand for the HSE, from communications, they will, after they've been dealing with some very high priority matters like in care homes and so on, and the thousands of complaints they've probably been getting in over the months, is they will start to inspect businesses in relation to COVID. And the key advice they gave me to pass on to the businesses was just to make sure that your control measures just are in line with their guidance. And when you open up the relevant parts of the guidance on the HSE website, which is split into construction or is split into retail shops or whatever your part is in, your sector is in, and then compare the guidance against the HSE risk assessment, you can actually just literally nearly pass the control measures in that guidance straight over into your risk assessment and try and approach it that way. And I am so sure that is nearly a bulletproof way to make sure your risk assessment is suitable and sufficient. But the most important, another important key thing is consult with the employees on the risk assessment. Show it to them, show them the significant findings, and ask for feedback. A lot of the complaints that HSE get, and I get as well in local government, and my colleagues get in with hundreds of other local governments around the UK, is staff complaining, my employer hasn't done this or haven't done that. Brings it to the enforcement body's attention, and we start looking at it. Consult with your employees, ask for feedback, and then see if the feedback is relevant, and amend the risk assessments and the control measures if you deem it appropriate. And this is really important because these simple steps that I'm advising helps make sure that if you are ever visited by the HSE inspector, they don't find a significant or material breach of the legislation, and you avoid their fee intervention, which currently is £157 an hour if they have to do enforcement. And these can get quite costly. And of course, it helps avoid further investigations in general, and they're very, very busy people, and you don't want them really prioritizing on you. And that's the overall thing I can see as well. I can also see, actually, when I did look at this previously, the HSE have historically concentrated on occupational lung disease, musculoskeletal disorders, work-related stress, and I can now see how COVID is coming into everything that they're doing. So make sure that you get your COVID risk assessment and control measures up to date, but at the same time, keep your eye on the ball of the other health and safety risks that can be presented in the business, and just try and monitor, communicate, and the monitoring of what's happening and communication with your staff will really help ensure that your risk assessments are being implemented and are being effective. Okay, and it just avoids any hassle in at the end of the day. That's it in summary. I'm happy to answer any questions, but hopefully I've given a good overview of the approaches that can be taken.
Thanks, Richard. I really do appreciate that. And the charges, just something that strikes me. It really is worthwhile avoiding and stopping them crawling over your business, because they tend to come back, don't they, on a regular basis.
Yes.
We've had one question in general, and it was around mechanical ventilation and circulation of air. I have put it to the panel, and nobody is sticking their hands up to actually answer it, apart from Alan, who's sort of suggesting it's maybe from about aircon. I don't know if you want to speak on it, Alan. Come back and answer. Yeah. We'll have to try and find an answer.
I'm assuming this is the one from the HSE the other week, where there was a communication on centralised air conditioning systems. These are the ones that would draw back air from a building and then redirect it into other rooms, rather than sort of the newer ones, which are sort of controlled centrally and sort of air is expelled and taken in separately. You need to find out from, obviously, depending on what building you're in, landlords, and this has been pulled towards me, having to go back to landlords to see what air conditioning systems are in. A good indication in any building is if your windows are openable, then there is every chance that it could be a centralised system. And what the HSE are advising is that those systems, and although we're coming to cooler weather now, should be switched off, and then everybody resorts back to opening the windows. Good old-fashioned sort of ventilation system. But it's something that you need to challenge with the landlord first, see what you've got, and if push comes to shove, it's switched off and you're back to opening the windows to let in some fresh air. That's where it comes from. I think that's where it's from, I'm guessing.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you very much, Alan, for stepping up to the plate on that. I don't think we've got any other. We've got another question. Can Gayle tell them specifically what they've been doing in terms of sharing staff toilets? That's a very direct question. Gayle, can you give us a help?
We took away the hand dryers and replaced with paper towels. We have blocked off urinals. We are lucky that we've got only a quarter of our staff in, so that's where we're at the moment. But long term, we are going to have to bring in extra toilets to accommodate.
Wow. Pretty
much 70% of our employees are male. And we have very few females on site at the moment as well. So that's made a difference. But yeah, that's what we've started with.
All right. Thank you, Gayle. That's really helpful. I'm very conscious of time, and we've probably run over a couple of minutes. So I'm going to wrap it up now and actually say thank you very much to all our speakers who have taken time to develop presentations and give of their time and their expertise today. And certainly on behalf of SEMLEP, we really do appreciate that time that you've given. And I hope I'm speaking on behalf of everybody that's attending the webinar today. And those that are attending, thank you for joining us, and hopefully you found it useful. If you have any further feedback or questions, then please email them to the Growth Hub and we will endeavour to answer them. We'll send up a follow-up email with a recording, a feedback survey, and the supporting slides from the presenters this afternoon. And so all that leaves for me to do is say stay safe, and thank you and goodbye.